Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 672 of the Juicebox Podcast. On today's episode of the Juicebox Podcast, Jenny Smith and I are going to define antibodies. Autoantibodies. Antibodies, autoantibodies. Antibodies. What the hell are antibodies? Dun, 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 dun. Here we go. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. Are you a U.S. resident who has type 1 diabetes or is the caregiver of someone with type 1? Because if you are, you can support the T1D Exchange and research for type 1 diabetes by going to t1dexchange.org/juicebox. When you get there, join the registry, fill out the survey. The whole thing takes fewer than 10 minutes, and you are going to help people with type 1. You're also going to support the Juicebox Podcast. I don't even want to stop talking now. My voice sounds amazing in my ears. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by US Med. US Med is the #1 distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide. They are the #1 specialty distributor for Omnipod DASH, the #1 fastest growing tandem distributor, and the #1 rated distributor in Dexcom customer satisfaction surveys. US Med is a place where you get your diabetes supplies from. Most of us use them, right? Most of us are using some sort of an online. Wait a minute. Are you not getting your supplies online? Okay, hold on. First of all, it's super easy to get your supplies online. Are you not doing this? All right, hold on a second. Let me get a sip of water. I got to explain this whole thing to you. So we used to use another company. We've actually used a couple of them. And in the past, they've been, spotty. Let's say spotty in their customer service. But US Med prides themselves on their white glove treatment of their customers. US Med has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, and they want you to get better service and better care than you're accustomed to getting now. US Med always provides 90 days worth of supplies and fast free shipping. You can get a free benefits check right now at usmed.com/juicebox or by calling 888-721-1514. US Med carries everything from insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies to the latest CGMs, including Libre 2 and Dexcom G6. They accept Medicare nationwide and over 800 private insurers. This 888 number is dedicated for Juicebox Podcast listeners. Call now, 888-721-1514. Get the service you deserve. Get your supplies without a big hassle. US Med, usmed.com/juicebox. Look, everybody, these supplies are going to be coming forever and ever. I'd love it if you had it set up so that it just happened and you didn't have to think about it. That's how we have it here, and it is it's a weight lifted. It's another thing you don't have to think about. Let US Med think about that. You go live your life. We've talked about antibodies in thyroid episodes,
yes,
and other places. I am told by Isabel, who helps me run the Facebook page, that people are confused about antibodies. And she said to me, please do a defining episode about them. Put it in one place where they can find it. It's easy to understand. And I said, okay, Isabel, I will absolutely do that. Now, here comes the problem. I still get a little confused as well. And I know it's just because I haven't looked at it closely enough. If you said to me right now, I'm not going to look at anything. I'm not just going to go off of what I remember, right? Then you're going to tell me.
Yes.
If you said to me antibodies in conjunction with type 1 diabetes, I would say something like your body has antibodies that are meant to do stuff, fight illness or disease or whatever. And if you have type 1 diabetes, or if you are predisposed to type 1 diabetes, there are antibodies in your system that are likely to go get the beta cells in your pancreas at some point, and they don't belong in your body. And I don't know if that's right. That's literally the best I can conjure up out of my mind. Just tell me how wrong I am.
No, not really wrong. I think it's the way that you think about it or see it. It's, an antibody in general, whether it's for diabetes or thyroid or other, issues, an antibody essentially is just a protein that your immune system uses to essentially take care of a foreign object, be it a virus or, bacteria or something that's potentially harmful, right? I mean, that's the gist of an antibody. But in someone specifically with type 1 diabetes, and something in the body triggered an immune response. And so your body, unfortunately, has identified beta cells as the foreign object. So your body produces antibodies to take care of this foreign object, which technically isn't foreign, but for some reason, the body now thinks that it is. So the antibodies they're there. They would be identifiable in the bloodstream in a blood draw if you had antibodies that were specifically attacking the beta cells, right? Mm-hmm. So we can do blood draws to test for antibodies. We can do blood draws to test for insulin antibodies. One of the very well-known ones that most people definitely have done at diagnosis is the GAD antibody. Mm-hmm. And then, if you've done any testing or had any family members who've done testing through like TrialNet or any of those types of places, there are, I think, at least 2 other antibodies that they're kind of looking for as well, to identify. So in general, an antibody is it's really supposed to be there. It's something that your body uses. Unfortunately, it becomes something not great because of the way that your body is identifying the beta cells, which it's now seeing as like a foreign invader. Okay.
So 4 autoantibodies are markers of beta cell autoimmunity in type 1 diabetes. Isolate cell antibodies, ICA against cytoplasmic proteins in the beta cell, antibodies to glutamic acid, decarbolase, that's the GAD65, right? Yep. Insulin autoantibodies, which are IAA, and IA2A to protein tyrosine phosphatase. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. All right. So not everybody has these like let's just take GAD as an example, right? Like if I tested the population, most people would not have that antibody.
They shouldn't. Honestly, if you're testing positive for the GAD antibody, it indicates an immune attack, which really points to type 1 diabetes specifically. Okay. So general person should not have GAD antibodies.
Right. So if you have it, where I don't understand where you get it from. Like how does one body, Jenny, are we outside of your depth?
I don't know.
Okay, right.
I think if that could be, I don't know if it's out of my depth. It's certainly out of the realm of
understanding at this point.
I think it's, to my limited explanation, it would be the reason that there's no cure.
It's because we don't know how that happens.
We don't.
Okay.
Right. And some other really, really intelligent scientist, I'm sure could say, hey, we are pointing things in this direction or, whatever. And I'd be like, okay, well, that's really fancy. But
So for reasons that maybe at this moment beyond understanding, a person can develop one or all of these antibodies. And then what you're waiting for next, it's the other shoe to drop. It's for you to get ill, sick, stressed, something, your immune system to be like, all right, boys, go attack those invaders. And they run right past your your virus and go right into your pancreas and go after your beta cells.
And that's why there are, and for the GAD, I think I was actually wrong. I think that there are other autoimmune conditions. If I'm not incorrect, I think thyroid, you may have GAD antibodies present.
Okay.
And I think there's another autoimmune disorder, if I'm correct, that may be something that would show positive. Mm-hmm. I would have to, again, look that up, but I'm quite sure GAD is also present for thyroid. Okay. So anyway, in terms of a virus, that's why many people believe that people with type 1 may have had a virus, which was like a switch. It's like a light switch. That's kind of how I think about it. Mm-hmm. My brother probably had the same virus that I had, if the reason that I have type 1 is from a virus. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I have type 1. I'm quite sure that my brother and I, living in the same house, probably had the same viruses.
Sure.
Why my body decided to interact with that virus and the switch turned on and decided to flip and say, okay, well, we've taken care of this, but now we're also seeing these body parts or these pieces of the body, the beta cells, as foreign objects too. So why one person versus another? I don't know.
Yeah. I would, again, I think I've said in other episodes, I don't know for certain, but I would bet money that Arden had Coxsackie virus and then she got type 1. I've heard a lot of people specifically say Coxsackie and then type 1. As a matter of fact, we had the CEO on of Prevention Bio. Hey, it's Scott. I know I put the ad at the beginning of the episode today. I trick you a little bit, but I still need to pop in and tell you that US Med offers a free benefits check, and you can get it at usmed.com/juicebox or by calling a special number just for Juicebox Podcast listeners, 888-721-1514. US Med carries everything from your insulin pumps to your diabetes testing supplies. Go check them out. Who was on to talk about Temizolab, which I always mispronounce, and later I will get a message after this goes up where they say you've pronounced it wrong again. But I know that. He was talking about how one of the ways that he thought you could significantly cut down on type 1 diabetes is to inoculate people against Coxsackie virus.
Exactly.
And he said, so that to me, I mean, if someone's saying that, then they've seen enough impact that way that they're saying, like, don't get me wrong, like Coxsackie doesn't make type 1 diabetes, right? But if you have these autoantibodies, which I'm assuming Arden had, then you get Coxsackie. I'm thinking what he was saying was that there's more frequency to go from a person who has autoantibodies who gets Coxsackie to type 1 than there is a person who has autoantibodies and they get the flu and then they go to type 1, et cetera, like something like that.
Right.
So yeah, there's probably a mechanism in there that, I mean, we don't understand. Maybe somebody else does, but.
And the Coxsackie is certainly one that's well identified. I mean, as you said, you can look for it and easily find multiple noted references to Coxsackie and type 1.
Yeah.
But it is also more of a childhood
disease
illness, right? Which then also leads to the questions of, well, if an adult didn't have Coxsackie, then why all of a sudden does this random adult who has no family history of type 1 at all, right? Yeah. Why is it all of a sudden there?
Right. Well, so let's keep talking about that for a second. It's possible you could have these. I mean, it's possible that there are people who live their entire life with these autoantibodies and never get type 1 diabetes, right? And so I hear from, I mean, this podcast has allowed me to talk to so many people that there's no longer an age that I think you can't get type 1 diabetes after. Like I know that people used to think, it was kind of like that weird slippery slope of, the JDRF was the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. So people were like, oh, it's juvenile diabetes. You can only get it if you're a kid. Obviously wasn't true. But even in my uninitiated understanding, if you would have found me before Arden had type 1, I would have told you, like, if you can get it like 30 years old, you're not going to get diabetes, like type 1, right? And that's how people would think about it in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with people who've been in their 60s, upper 60s. I have one woman who was 71 when she was diagnosed with type 1. So, there's certainly no age that it is not possible.
Right. No, I
think at this point,
I want to say 73 is now the oldest person that I've interviewed.
Really?
Yeah. But I mean, what the hell? You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
And talk about, thinking you made it. I mean, really.
Right. Yeah, right. I'm this far in life and this is what I get handed now. Yeah. Like, what the heck?
I thought I was done.
I thought I was all good. Right.
So I think that if I go back to what Isabel's saying to me about that people ask about this all the time, about the antibodies and not understanding them, that is what I want them to leave this episode understanding, is that, first of all, you didn't do anything wrong. Right. And I think if we could kind of shift gears away from a more medical to maybe a more psychological for a second, you didn't give your kid type 1 diabetes. Like, no, you didn't give it to yourself. It's not possible. You either have these antibodies within your system or you don't. And like Jenny said earlier, modern medicine can't tell why at this point. And if it was just that you watched The Price is Right too much, or or you had too much ice cream, or like something like that, the things that people knee-jerk worry about when it first happens, like, oh my God, you know what I'm saying? Like, people come up to you, not always, but there are a lot of people who have personal experiences where an uninformed person will come up to them and just say, like, what did you feed that kid? How did you do this? Oh, absolutely. To them, right. And that's a big problem. And then it's a bigger problem if it just happened to you and you don't know that couldn't be the case.
Correct. I mean, when I was first diagnosed, my mom's coworker, my mother was a grade school teacher, and one of her coworkers said, well, I only overheard the conversation between my mom and my dad. My mom did not tell this to me directly, but she was telling him that her coworker had said, well, thank goodness it's just juvenile diabetes. She'll grow out of it. Right. I mean, and again, this was, in the 80s. So clearly a lot of, the misinformation is still out there. I'm not saying it's not, but that's the misnomer of juvenile diabetes too.
It'll be over
like it'll be over soon. As soon as like you turn 18, magically, like, I'm not a juvenile anymore, must be gone.
Arden diagnosed in 2006, and I've lost count of the amount of people who've asked me what age she'll outgrow it.
Right.
As if, by the way, have you ever outgrown anything? Like, have you ever heard of like, I don't know. He can't process protein. Oh, he'll outgrow that. You don't outgrow. There's in the history of the world, I've never heard anybody say, "Oh, cancer, don't worry, you'll outgrow that." Yeah. Like, no one's ever said that, but for some reason, it is a really interesting example of how the wording is impactful. Just by calling it juvenile, you make it feel like once you're an adult, it doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Exactly.
But I just listen. I want people to know that you didn't do anything to cause your type 1.
No,
or your child's type 1. And
I, the question that I also get kind of along the same line is from a lot of the adults that I work with who have children. They themselves as an adult have type 1. And the question always comes up. Either should I get my kids tested, or how likely is it for my child to get type 1? Quite honestly, there are statistics. If you really wanted to look things up, you certainly could look up some statistics, but it doesn't necessarily say your child, because you have type 1, is 100% going to have type 1 too.
Right.
So in a causative, if you have type 1 and your child ends up developing type 1, likely there's a genetic link there, but you didn't necessarily cause that piece to turn on.
Right. Like, if you have brown eyes and you don't like them, and your kid has brown eyes, it's not your fault your kid has brown eyes. Like, I understand
the way genetics work.
Yeah. And I understand how people feel. Like, if I'm being honest with you, I wondered for a really long time what I could have done differently
Sure.
And so I was a stay-at-home dad. So I was with Arden 24/7. You guys all know me fairly well from the podcast. Like, I'm the kind of person who would wake up in the morning and be like, wow, it's warm out. Get in the car. We're going to the zoo. Screw the dishes. Like, we went every which way. And before I understood these antibodies, I used to think, did I not wash something well? Did I take her to the wrong place? What if I just wouldn't have gone here? Was it a ball pit that gave her diabetes? Like, before I understood that, in all likelihood, Arden was getting diabetes, whether it was going to be when she was 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, it was definitely happening. I don't think that we could have locked Arden in a bubble and, you know what I mean? Like, no. I don't understand the point of that, right? Like, at some point, let's say that would be true. Let's say that by the way, you're going to have to be really old for this one, but John Travolta was in a movie called The Boy in the Bubble in the 70s.
I was going to mention that. I was like, nobody's going to know what we're talking about.
Doesn't matter. I'm saying it. Okay. It was a TV movie of the week in the 70s. I know you don't know what a TV movie of the week is. If you're under a certain age, I don't care. John Travolta lived in a bubble. It's the only way he wasn't going to die, because the outside world was just going to, his body couldn't handle it. Eventually he left that bubble. he didn't care. So my point is that if you've got these autoantibodies and you're going to end up with type 1 diabetes, you're going to end up with type 1 diabetes. Then you're going to live with diabetes, because that's the straw you drew, Right. So you can't feel bad about it. I know it's going to happen and people are going to feel guilty, but it's these antibodies' fault, not yours.
Right.
Seriously.
And it's how your body interacts with them, right? Yeah. Whether your body uses them the way that they're supposed to identify truly foreign pieces, objects, viruses in the body. That's their job. You want them to be there. That's a really important thing. But sometimes they don't do the right thing.
Friendly fire, Jenny. Yeah. Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, this was depressing.
Nah. It was informative. And I hope it was more, I guess, informative in a way that's more, I guess, understandable.
Yeah, no, I appreciate breaking it down, because it's just like the other defining episodes, really. You just make these assumptions that people know what bolus means. And if they don't, they start forming other thoughts. And if you don't understand what these antibodies are, you could run around your whole life thinking you did something. Or I could still think,
right,
why didn't I wash Arden's hands one time when she was a year old before I did something? Or I don't know, whatever the hell. So.
Right. I mean, I've gotten off of the whole, I've had friends who've asked me, well, why do you think? I'm like, I don't think anymore. Yeah. I manage this, and I don't have time to go back and think, because it's not going to make a difference.
Right.
Right. I mean, if it made a difference, in fact, of proving what happened, and then I could actually move into solving and having a cure. Awesome. But no.
Well, think of it like this, really. I'll keep this vague, but my son is having a problem with another person. Okay. Mm-hmm. A person who holds sway over him. And he's a bright kid and a thoughtful kid, and he's a thinker, and he will look at what's happening and break the problem down and say, maybe if I try this, this will allow me to, change this. To let this other person see that this isn't the case, or maybe I can end around them and get around. And I've watched him for years go over it and over and over it, and at times make himself crazy about it. And just the other day, he said to me, there's no path. He's like, I'm not the only one impacting this situation. And no matter what I do,
it's not right.
It won't work. Yeah. I have to just accept that this is the reality, and I'm going to go do something else now. And when he was talking about that, I thought, that is how I used to feel about diabetes. I used to think maybe I could think my way around it, or, at least to give myself comfort. And what I realized is that eventually the comfort is knowing that not everybody gets out of this unscathed, and people get things. And my kid's got an autoimmune problem, and she ended up with type 1 diabetes. And now we choose another path and go live happily on that one. So
you move on.
Yeah,
yes,
for sure. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have a good day.
You too.
I want to thank Jenny for being here. Don't forget that Jenny works at integrateddiabetes.com. If you'd like to hire her, you can. And I'd like to thank our sponsor today, US Med. Get your diabetes supplies easily. It doesn't need to be a big hassle. And with US Med, it won't be. Check them out and get your free benefits check at usmed.com/juicebox or by calling 888-721-1514. There are links to US Med and all of the sponsors in the show notes of your podcast player and at juiceboxpodcast.com. And don't forget to go take that survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. When you support the sponsors, you're supporting the show. At this point, I don't even remember how many Defining Diabetes episodes there are, but there's got to be more than 40. If you're enjoying them, you can find them at juiceboxpodcast.com, diabetesprotip.com, or by joining the private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes, and then heading up to the top. I want to call it I always want to use the wrong word. And then hold on a second, I'll tell you what it's called when you get to so the Facebook page is a private group. It's really terrific. I think it's got like 25,000 members in it right now. And at the top, here it is. There's a featured tab. So you have to answer a couple of questions to get in. But once you're in there, go to that featured tab. And there's a list of all the Defining Diabetes episodes, all the variables, all the how we eats, the quick start guides. If you're just starting with the show, the pro tip series. There's a list of popularly requested episodes, if I'm going to use English, special episodes, Scott and Jenny's, where they're called Ask Scott and Jenny. People send in questions and Jenny and I answer them. A whole bunch of stuff on how to bolus for fat and protein. I mean, there's a ton here. Anyway, it's all in that private Facebook group up under the featured tab. This is the part where I say thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Please subscribe in your apps. Subscribe and follow. Follow and subscribe.